some other opportunities in consulting outside of strictly the clinical care. But the purpose of the topic is really kind of postoperative length of stay in a TAVR patient. It's going to be myself. I'll be working closely with Paul Fiorilli, who's going to be my community member, who you know very well, and then Dr. Robin Harris, who is my faculty member at University of Tennessee, who is also advanced practice with a background in cardiology with a focus on pulmonary hypertension. I decided to go back to school a couple of years ago. I chose the program at University of Tennessee outside of Penn for a few reasons. One was cost. Two, it's a hybrid program where they take their DNP and PhD students together. So learning from those that are going to conduct the research, as well as those of us that want to implement the research. In a DNP program, you have to do a scholarly project. The scholarly project is something that's either evidence-based practice, quality, or performance improvement, which comes into this topic. So we're better to start than the population that you know best. Day-to-day, I'm involved in the care of the valvular heart disease patient, most intimately with the TAVR patients. So I'm not going to go through this stuff, but just to kind of give people a concept, when you go into doing some of these projects, it takes a little bit of time. So these were conversations that started back in February, and then all through the spring, all through the summer, and then to current date, it took a lot of conversations at corporate level, divisional level, and then entity level to get the buy-in and approval for the project. We do go through an IRB process. I did go through University of Tennessee as well as Penn. The IRB process is different from those that are going to conduct human research. We do get an exemption for this being that it's a quality improvement. The project timeline that I'm going to talk about today, the hope is to implement this coming Monday, October 16th. I will study at the bedside for the first quarter, and then I have February 16th as my end date because there will be a 30-day lag on getting some of the financial information as well as readmission information for the project. A little bit of background to this. TAVR going back to 2016 is when TAVR became more popular than isolated AVR, and today TAVR procedures outnumber the number of not only just AVR, but AVR plus something. So AVR plus mitral, AVR plus ascendings, et cetera, et cetera. And that orange trajectory continues to grow over the course of time. When you take a look at today, despite this saying July 2023, this is actually outdated. There are now 833 TAVR centers in the US. There's 876 cardiac surgery centers in the US. So the great majority are offering the same thing that we are today. When you take a look at the volume, this is data that's extrapolated from something that we call the TVT registry. It's a patient registry that is maintained by American College of Cardiology and Society of Thoracic Surgery, and all cases in the US and Canada, including your TAVR patients, your transcatheter mitral, tricuspid, and pulmonics are stored in the registry. You can see that last year was just shy of 100,000 cases. Certainly with this calendar year, we'll exceed 100,000 isolated TAVR cases in the US. Our upward trajectory looks pretty similar. When you take a look at our data going back to fiscal 08 until now, we had a continued upward trajectory as well, and that's the approvals of certainly intermediate and then low risk. There's a little bit of a lull here that's highlighted that says COVID. There's actually something else that impacted us during that time frame. In July of 2020, we opened a new TAVR site at our Chester County Hospital site, so we reallocated 10% of our business from HUP over to the Chester County site. So we saw a little bit of a dip in the volume, not only because of the pandemic, but that reallocation of cases. And today we're back on our upward trajectory to do 400 cases at the HUP campus. When you take a look at how do we compare HUP to other centers, we're kind of following in this volume here. So we're still in that top 5%. And as a health system, we're in the top 2%. We're completing somewhere between 900 and 1,000 cases between HUP, Penn Presbyterian, Chester County Hospital, and Lancaster General. Within that TVT registry, there's a benchmark data, both clinical and non-clinical data, and they do a star rating. It's between 1, 2, and 3 stars, with 3 being the top rated programs. And at HUP, we're fortunate to maintain a 3-star rating, which puts us in that top tier or the top 4% of all hospitals in the country. Not all of those 833 centers are publicly reporting for the star rating. There's about half of them. There's 435 in the country, but it still puts us in that top 5%. Despite being a good program, this isn't here where the project lies. This is where the problem was found. One of the metrics that they were put out are median length of stay, and the median length of stay at the HUP campus is 2 days. And comparative to all other centers in the US, it was double our national average. That created a little bit of conversation amongst us where folks were saying, well, we treat sicker patients, which then allowed us to dig in deeper into the case mix indices, as well as the STS predicted risk of mortality scores that are also stored in the registry. And when you do a comparison to those 100 and some thousand cases in the registry, not just our own data, What we found is regardless, median length of stay in the TAVR patient was down to 1 day across the nation. So this allowed us to move forward with the quality improvement project at HUB. We dug into the data. One of the things that we found is there was no recommendation on how long patients should stay in the hospital. We've heard rhetoric of patients are sicker, they don't want to go home, they want to stay with us. And then the conversation shifted. And the conversation shifted from the aspect of, are we not treating the patient and are we treating ourselves? Does it feel better for us to keep the patient in the hospital for 48 to 72 hours? And what do those outcomes look like? Up until now, all of our scripting in the ambulatory world has been telling these folks expect a 2-night overnight hospital stay, with the exception of those that already have permanent pacemakers in place. That group was excluded because the reason why we were keeping people 24 to 48 hours was really to assess for any kind of conductive disorders. That scripting is going to change with this project. We're going to start to talk to people about having a 1 to 1 to 2 night overstay. And then the other stuff in the literature showed us that early discharge was feasible, not only from a clinical perspective, there were lack of readmissions at 30 days, but also from a financial perspective, there was a lot of gain on net income. So the question for the project became, in the uncomplicated TAVR patient, what is a next day or an early day discharge protocol compared to what we're doing today? And that's going to be the topic for the project. The literature search associated with this was 5 years. It was 2018 to 2023. I kept a narrow search because it's a new topic, and a lot of the data on early or next day and even same day discharge came out during the COVID-19 pandemic. That search came across those 4 databases with those keywords, and what we found were 27 topics that were, most of the stuff was retrospective observational. There were a few prospective studies, but you can see that there's some down here in the bottom left, there's some stuff strictly focusing on specialty groups like bicuspid. Then there's some larger retrospective studies here on the middle right, where we're doing some work in a TVT database from 2015 to 19. And all of that data, when you kind of dig into and critically appraise each of those articles, found common themes. There were no randomized control trials and no experimental trials. There were no worse outcomes with early discharge, and perhaps in a lot of the articles showed improved outcomes. There were no clinically or statistically differences in early discharge versus those that stayed 2, 3, and or 4 days after TAVR. And the conclusion was TAVR was safe. So then coming back to the entity-specific area, taking a look at how, where did all of the barriers lie? Certainly don't get lost in the weeds on this particular slide, but it was a matter of understanding what type of responses we would get that would prohibit us from moving forward from this. And that would be any kind of responses from our advanced practice staff, from the bedside nursing staff, physical occupational therapy, things that are mandated for us, like early diagnostics on the day of discharge, your echocardiogram, so working with the echo labs. And what we found is the most important things on the pathway that we're doing, because a lot of the stuff you're already doing. We've adopted a fast track protocol dating back to 2015 and 16. We're already doing this. The key pieces to make this successful were going to be the patient education materials. It was going to have to come from the information that we present to them before their initial consultation. And then also in our early conversations to prepare both the patient as well as their support structure that there's a possibility that they go home the next day. The screening process and communication. This is going to be something that will appear in the EPIC template. It'll be documented that they were screened for early discharge and educated on early discharge. And then I would depend upon each of you to have that same conversations with them and remind them as to where they're on the pathway if they're still on schedule for a next day discharge. And then it comes down to clinical and non-clinical education sessions like this. I spent the past few months meeting with a lot of groups, learning a lot of different perspectives and what would work and what wouldn't work in those communication processes. What did it look like? August, they did some stuff with the APP leads, certainly the management teams on 8 and 9, directorship from PTOT and the COC directors. Most important in September is when I got the IRB approvals from both the University of Tennessee as well as the University of Pennsylvania. And then again, more educational sessions. And then that takes us to this month, a whole bunch of educational sessions with physician and non-physician staff. PT and OT, took conversations with them and trying to understand, is there a barrier where we're not mobilizing these patients early because we're awaiting physical therapy? And what I've learned is the PT, OT consults are part of an admission order set. What we've come upon, we've agreed upon, is with this particular group, when they're identified as an early discharge candidate, we will remove that PT-OT order, and I would depend upon each of you for that as well. When we remove that order, we're indicating that we don't need a physical or occupational therapy consult, and that this group will become the exception. If for some reason they fall off the pathway and we feel that it's necessary, then we can always go back and add it. The thought behind this is these patients walked into the hospital less than a day prior. The expectation is they'll do the same within that 24 to 28 hour period afterwards. And that's including those with single prong canes and walkers and rollators, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'm also working with the director of analytics and some of our senior technical consultant staff from Penn DNA. These are folks that maintain dashboards for us. We take a look at clinical and non-clinical data, and it provides us the ability to simplify sort of the information to our key stakeholders. The screening process in Epic will look something like this. Each of our consult notes and they're seen for their preoperative H&P will be the responsibility of the outpatient advanced practice providers. It'll appear at the bottom of the impression and plan. And it'll be strictly a screening process where based on their access, ECG findings, admission status, and family support. This will be focused on a group of transfemoral and or transeptal access patients. Anybody outside of that will be excluded. They will have no preoperative left and or right bundle branch blocks on their preoperative ECGs, and they will be elective admissions. We're not going to focus this early discharge pathway on those that are hospital transfers. And then certainly they'll have to have both the family support and be independent of their function upon returning home. Once they're scheduled for their surgery, key stakeholders receive a weekly email from me, and if there's any changes to that periodically throughout the week, but it indicates each of the cases that are be done weekly. There will be a new field that will appear at the bottom of that will talk about a next day discharge candidate, whether their screening status was included or excluded. This will be important for the CRC staff as well as the clinical staff to pay attention. The CRC staff likes this because this will prepare them early during your discharge rounds, and they can start to have their preparation of things necessary for the patient to go home at or before noon on the day following TAVR. On the inpatient side, there will be a very similar drop-down menu that's going to be built into the interventional cardiology communication handoffs. And it'll be anything that can happen in the ER, where there are access complications, where there are changes in their EKG, like a new left or right bundle, where there are any issues with the valve, where there are any kind of leaking, and then some of the other publicly reported metrics, like did they have a stroke or was there a change in their cognitive status? And then this will follow through as well. It'll be done by interventional or surgical APPs, whether they stay on that pathway. So this would be something that'll in their Epic documentation. What does it impact bedside nursing group? The expectation, like I mentioned before, these will be elective, will be first or second cases of the day, or third or fourth cases. And the expectation from the group that we've seen already is these are folks that would get out of bed around dinner time and then even mobilize them on the evening after dinner on post-operative day 0 if they're stable and there's no groin issues. Again, I'm going to reiterate, no consult for PT/OT in this group. So if you guys on your admission order set, I'll ask the APPs and or nursing to unclick that box and don't be dependent upon the consult before you start to mobilize them. When it comes to the medications, we focus on beta blockers and calcium channel blockers. Our typical regimen is to hold those medications on the morning of the procedure. Their last doses are on the morning, afternoon, or evening prior to their procedure. And then the expectation is we'll resume them post-operative day 0 or early on post-operative day 1, depending on clinical status. From the group that have gone home so far on post-operative day 1 over the past quarter, what we found is some of these patients require their medications on the evening of post-operative day 0 because of hypertensive episodes. And then what's going to happen is they're going to have their discharge echoes somewhere between 7 and 8 a.m. The echo lab is aware of that. They'll have technicians up there to get us an early echo before they go. Not only is that for us a standard of care, but this is also a Medicare mandate, something that is required for compliance within that TVT registry. I mentioned that this isn't new. We've actually been doing this behind the scenes from July through September. This is a project that's been going on both at HUP and independently over at Presbyterian. And if you take a look at the numbers from HUP alone, you can see a pretty quick increase in the number of people going home on post-operative day 1, up to almost 35% in the month of September. Some of these folks, they weren't all the folks that I mentioned before that had permanent pacemakers. Actually, the majority of the people did not have a permanent pacemaker, and then they did a quick breakout to understand if there were any barriers. And what I see is I see equal distribution of post-operative day 1 discharges coming from both on 8 and 9, and then the various sectors of each of those floors. So my expectation is this will be pretty successful over the next quarter. Long term, outside of the project, I suspect that this is going to be something that is going to be rolled out for us as a health system. You'll see it both at our Presbyterian, Chester County, and Lancaster General campus. The timeline for this, we've already kind of completed all of this, all of the necessary buy-in, going through all of the barriers at the hub campus, getting IRB approval. And then we're kind of in this phase here where I expect to do the project through mid-October through mid-February, with then the end result being a manuscript sometime in the spring. The manuscript will include things that are both clinical outcomes as well as compliance with screening and education of the patients, and then certainly taking a look at secondary things like financial and patient satisfaction. With that, that was pretty brief. I will certainly take any questions from the group. Any questions on the project, on the processes, how it would be impact your day-to-day care, or any questions on even moving on for either graduate school or career trajectories?
Okay. So, hi, this is Linda Hope. I assume that you'll be doing all the data collection. We won't be involved with anything.
That is correct. This will be stuff that'll be, I'm working with our director of analytics as far as building extrapolation from Epic. There's certain fields that will be pretty easy just to have mandatory for my dashboards. And then any kind of the manual stuff like patient screening and patient education, there'll be manual pulls by me with my ambulatory group.
Okay. Because I know that if nursing is involved, you really need to go through through Rebecca Tried. That's why I'm questioning that.
Yeah. So I'm not expecting any data pulls from anybody on 8 or 9.
David, I may have missed it because I was in and out a little bit, but of the patients that have already that you've already done that have been discharged post-op day 1, have there been any like readmissions for any complications or anything that you've seen on the outpatient side with any of those patients?
Yeah, excellent question. The answer is no. The great majority of the patients that were discharged on post-operative day 1, there have been a couple readmissions across both campuses, but the great majority of them were between post-operative day 21 and post-operative day 27, and they weren't felt to be preventable occurrences. Some of the things that we've seen were like heartburn related to gastritis and some home nursing that identified hypertension at home, sent the patient to the ER. They got a new script for medications and then discharged home. What we haven't seen is any complications, your syncopal episodes, bleeding, stroke, stuff like that. So encouraging, and it's in line with the data that we've seen not only nationally, but internationally as well.
Thanks. I don't think we have any questions from in here. Does anybody else have any questions before we log off? Doesn't sound like
I think the biggest piece will be just working with the nursing staff there, just ensuring that those PT/OT consults as part of the admission order set are not enabled, so that we're not dependent upon waiting for PT/OT consults, early on, and we can start that early mobilization. And again, these people are going to be hovered around the physician staff, the APPs, the PT/OT, CRCs, like everybody is going to be aware of who these individuals are. And again, it's stuff that's already started in the background. It would just be a matter of that culture change of waiting for PT/OT to come in and see them.
I guess you repeating that, David. Hi, I'm the CPL on 8 City and 9 City Biddy. Hi, sorry I missed your presentation last week. I was out sick, I think, when you met with some people. But so for this project, are people using that dot phrase and the new order set, or you're saying there's a fear that the current order set is going to continue to be placed by our APPs and providers and
it's
we
just
as
working
nurses,
with the current order set.
Okay, because I would love it if the providers got rid of that. I feel like that's a burden on nursing we're always policing the orders that other people are providing.
I'm going to reinforce that with our providers, both from interventional cardiology and cardiac surgery, to pull those. But then it would be just a matter of awareness, I think, from bedside nursing to say, hey, listen, this person I'm aware was identified as an early discharge, and that order is still there. Is there a reason? And that certainly could be either a phone call or text or something back to the provider.
Yeah, I mean,
I expect that there might be a couple probably early on, like in that first month, but then the expectation is we go in November, December, and then even long term, then this becomes more fluid, if you will. What
Yeah,
the
I
end
mean,
hope is maybe even removing that from the order set.
that would be great. I have a concrete example, two examples. We have RN-driven heparin protocol we've been using for probably 4 years now, and APPs are still placing the order set that has a daily PTT, and then, you know, nurses aren't reminding them to please get rid of that if they're on the protocol, and so patients are still getting multiple orders for PTTs. And now with the RN-driven electrolyte repletion protocol, they're still having orders for oral repletion standing plus protocol orders. So, I mean, this would be a third thing where, you know, nurses are looking to say, hey, get rid of that, get rid of that, or get rid of. So I wish we could fix this problem, especially with a lot of young new nurses who don't know that they need to question these orders. And, you know, they're a little frustrated that now their responsibility is reminding other people to get rid of orders that aren't necessary. So those are my examples.
When we unrolled the project, a lot of the stuff was to take into consideration, I think, burnout and new staff. The pandemic has left residual. There's been a lot of turnover in an academic center, not only from bedside burnout from the pandemic, but also sort of that academic grooming institution that we work in. So it was a matter of eliminating some of the EHR flags and some of the other things. The only hindrance that we saw was going to be the PTOT change of culture. And they're fully on board as well. And we'll work behind the scenes long term that will exceed beyond the time period of the project itself. But because my expectation is this is going to become very similar to what we did with the fast track protocol in this population, it will change what we do moving forward, including the order sets. PTOT has been extremely open to this. To reallocate. There's no implications for them if they don't get that consult. There's no financial or clinical implications for them. So they could reallocate some of their services over to the patient population that it's needed. So this is kind of like, this was the primary topic, but what we found is a lot of secondary issues, like some of the things even that you mentioned that could be worked on behind the scenes. And we've also been in contact with the Epic EHR and IT teams, which, as we all know, is very slow to move forward with some of the projects and their prioritization. But so my hope is to change some of that stuff probably in like the first or second quarter of 24.
That sounds great. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, David. We'll let you go. Appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.